Good afternoon, everyone. Just want to do a quick mic check, and then we will get things going. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another Lord of the Rings online casual stroll. My name is Matt Elliott. I go by Scenario on the message boards, and I'm a senior world designer working on Lord of the Rings Online. Been doing this for a very, very long time. I actually just, I think it was last week or the week before, celebrated my 8th year at SSG, which is the current developer for Lord of the Rings, and then I've worked on Lord of the Rings for about 10 years before that as well, so it has been a very long time. So for those of you that are unfamiliar, this is a world design focused stream. We are going to go through the region of Mordor Besieged, which is one of our flashback regions today. Again, for those of you that aren't familiar, this is world and level design focused. I'm not going to be talking about anything that has to do with things like lag, class balance, PvMP. I'm not going to talk much about the server transfers to the new 64-bit worlds and the 64-bit worlds in general. We are excited that those are going to be coming out soon, but I'm not really involved in the process that goes into getting those servers set up and getting them running. So I'm not the person to ask those questions for. If you do have questions about those things, such as timing and whatnot, highly recommend you pay attention to message boards, Discord, social media, and even any other streams that like Cordovan might be doing later this week, his usual Friday streams as well, for information about that sort of thing. But for now, let's start talking about Mordor Besieged. And another thing, for those of you that are new here, if I've talked for a while and I haven't had a drink, I have my drinks right here next to me. So be sure to yell at me in chat to go take a drink, so that I will pause and not have a completely destroyed voice by the end of all of this. So, anyways, thank you all for being here, and why don't we head on to Mordor Besieged. So Mordor Besieged is a region that is, like I said before, a flashback region. It's a flashback region to Mordor. So players kind of experienced Mordor firsthand way, way back in the Mordor expansion pack. And what we wanted to do with Mordor Besieged is use that as an opportunity to tell the story of the, one of the major battles that happened in the Second Age, I believe it was, for Mordor. And it is a very different region than what you're used to seeing in normal Mordor. It is not, while it is still a wasteland, it is not this blasted, dead, volcanic region. It has a little bit more life to it, and it's got a lot going on. Let me just clear out my UI, because I abhor all of those notifications. And we can start exploring through here. So the goal with this region was to, kind of take the footprint of Mordor, particularly Gorgoroth, I believe. Yep, or Doromarth rather. So we have this footprint here of the original Doromarth region, and what we wanted to do was kind of layer it over in the past and show what these different landmarks and locations that we are used to seeing, basically west to east all the way up to Barad-dûr, what they looked like in the past. There are certainly some things that I think we were fairly successful with when we were building this region, and there are others that I think we could have done a little bit better job of selling, particularly the concepts of this region at war. And that was one of the points of criticism that we had when we released this region, was that for a region that is meant to show the conflict between different forces, different armies, there wasn't much conflict happening in the region itself. And we kind of took that to heart, and when we were building Elderslade, and we produced Elderslade at War as kind of the war-torn version of that, as the Durin and his dwarf armies were approaching. Durin and his armies were approaching Gundabad. We wanted to better represent a war that was going on there, and that's why Elderslade at War has very significant differences between the original and it in terms of showcasing the war. And that was all because as we were producing this, it feels like we have a bunch of standing armies in this region that are all just kind of off in their corners, but there's no actual real conflict happening in the region itself. So we wanted to make sure that we better represented it with Elderslade at War. I think one of the things we did do fairly well in this region, though, is kind of show off familiar spaces in a different light. You're not used to seeing Mordor with the blue sky that's up there. You're not used to it, being a little happier, as happy as a wasteland can be. So I think we did a good job with that. It was just selling the war aspect of it that we faltered a little bit. Sam Burke says, "Hello there, welcome." Making my best Kenobi impression. And maybe that's how I should start opening up my streams. Is "Oh, hello there." Just grow out my beard a little bit more. I have a robe that I could just pull the robe on and Kenobi it up to start the streams. And Sam Burke also says, "I want to see Nirn in Lotro." I think those are definitely that is, I think, one of, at least when we're talking about kind of more end game regions, at least as far as what the impression of something like Mordor is, we get a lot of requests to do Nirn. And I think Nirn is an interesting region because it is the breadbasket of Mordor, right? And what does being the breadbasket of Mordor mean for Mordor? I think we've tried representing that sort of thing in other regions before. I think Angmar, the Croftlands of Angmar were supposed to represent the breadbasket of Angmar. The farmlands where the people of Angmar got their food, where they grew their food and raised their cattle and whatnot. I think Nirn is an interesting opportunity, especially if it is something that is set at the furthest end of our storytelling continuity, so that it would be a continuation of our ongoing story as opposed to a fill-in-the-gaps region. I feel like something like Nirn is big enough, and for those of you unfamiliar with the map, so we've got all of Mordor here. Doromarth is where Mordor Besieged takes place, and then we'll zoom out, and then you basically have Nirn here. And we're kind of bordering into those areas with Harandor and Near Harad, Far Harad. Like, we just got to go a little bit north, and we could get to those regions. We could get into Nirn. But if you're even looking at this map, it is a considerably large region. There would certainly be foothills and whatnot. Like, I would imagine that a lot of the space in the lower left probably would just be impassable mountains, and we would try to focus more on regions around the Sea of Nirn itself. But it's still very, very large. So this is not something where we would want to treat it as a fill-in-the-gaps sort of experience. And because we wouldn't want to treat it as a fill-in-the-gaps sort of experience, that usually tends to push our decision-making towards, that sort of region would be an end-game region. It would be a continuation of our advancing story. So then we would need to figure out what are our reasons for going into Nirn. How are we going to continue the narratives of Mordor, but in a way that represents the passage of time? Like, we probably wouldn't represent it as um, you know, set in the time frame of the destruction of the ring, because that would imply lower level content, weird timey-wimey stuff going on in terms of our narrative storytelling. It's possible we could do a flashback region, but sometimes like flashback regions kind of feel like they are better as a theme park ride, such as Mordor Besieged. Better as a theme park ride. You go in, you do your content experience, you get out, but you're not really expected to live in this region. And so I feel like something like Nern, it would feel kind of like a waste to have it be a flashback because of its size, and because it hasn't been represented before. Um, so yeah, I'm not like I did not participate in the building of this region. I was working on what was I working on? I was working on portions of the Gladden Fields as well as parts of Minas Morgul while we were building this. Another designer was responsible with building all of this, and I think sometimes one thing people don't always understand, and we talked about this a little bit with Elder Slate at War, with Azanulbazar, with this region, where even though it is a replica of an existing region, we have the footprint that we need, and a lot of the things like we're able to carry over, things like rock formations and rock placement, major structural stuff. Those can carry over with the copy. That doesn't mean that we are just, pushing a button, copying a bunch of stuff, and automatically we now have a new region. Because we had to do a lot of scene file work, day file work. We had to take a look at all of the ruins that we had in the region and decide whether or not it was appropriate for those ruins to still be there, appropriate for them to be ruined. What state are things going to be in this region, in the time period that the region calls for. Um, so, there are often times where like people will just like say off the cuff, "Oh, just make a copy of it." Making a copy is not a quick and simple solution for anything, because we do still want to do work in here. We still want to make it distinct and unique and make it something that can stand on its own. Um, I think with Mordor Besieged, we tried to represent that through, the status of the different ruins and structures that we're exploring through here. They're not pristine. The setting, the time setting for it is not so far back that we're looking at, completely pristine buildings and whatnot, castles, fortresses. But they do change. They are different. How we're representing them are different. What creatures might be existing in places that you were familiar with as far as camps go, different. We still have our, Mount Doom volcano up there in the distance, but it's different, and we had to do work in order to make it feel different. Druid's Fire says, the Mordor Besieged story is probably one of my favorites, and the ore nodes as well. Priorities. The story was really interesting too, because I think we exist within our IP, right? What we have the rights to, and we have to really not stray outside of that, at least in directly referencing things that are not things that we are supposed to reference. We can look at the core texts for Lord of the Rings, the trilogy. We can look at The Hobbit, and we can look at the appendices within those. But sometimes there are things that, even though there might be events alluded to, we don't have the details available to us. And that requires us to put work into making as accurate a representation as we can. There is a whole component in this region surrounding a handful of NPCs that have unfamiliar names. And a lot of that is because we could not directly use the names of those characters, but we still wanted to make sure that we had them represented here in this region and had them have their own stories. We've done that before with Sauron as Antheron, right? Like, we need to make sure that we're not stepping outside of our, you know, safety area when it comes to referencing the source material. But it does kind of force us to be a little creative in figuring out a way that we can represent those things within a modified context. We'll call it that. The huts with leaves on top are absolutely lush. I think you were talking about perhaps the elf structures there. It's funny, like the elf structures, the elf tents are always something that, they look cool, but I always kind of wonder about the practicality of setting them up. Like, I've gone camping as a kid, and you have like the little, like, the tension rods and all of that to set up your tent. I'm just like, how do these elves make these cool spirally leaf tents stand up? Mr. Alex13 says, is there any chance we can see Mordor during the Third Age before destruction of the ring? I've always wanted to see Barad-dûr and Mount Doom together in the dark, maybe as a starter zone for Stout Axe. I don't know what the future will bring in terms of representing Mordor. In part because, we're very focused on the Harad storylines, and we're starting to think about where we're going to go and what we're going to do after that. And we're still very all in on Harad. I think as far as seeing Mount Doom and Barad-dûr non-destroyed in a single space, it's wouldn't shock me if a simple day file change is all that's really needed to pull that off for you. Decline. So, there may be opportunities in the future for instances that tell those stories and can show those things, but I couldn't tell you when and how those things would occur. So one of the things too that since I'm stumbling across him right now, that's worth talking about is how we represented the ring wraiths here in the region. All of them are here, and all of them are meant to be challenge encounters on the landscape, kind of the roving threats for the region. I think the designer who was doing that was responsible for a lot of the other roving threat content, and it was really kind of near and dear to him, so he felt like this was a great place to kind of introduce that. And it's kind of interesting that, with these ring wraiths, we have them in game, and then on the legendary worlds, on Angmar, for example, we have Angmar and Mordor, for example, we have the Ringwraith encounters, and I don't know how much inspiration for what was done with these encounters on landscape was kind of taken for the legendary world encounters, but I certainly know that those were looked at and considered when it comes to, okay, what are we going to do for the Ringwraiths on the legendary worlds? Druid's Fire says, will we be able to properly launch our chickens when will we be able to properly launch our chickens into the Crack of Doom? I'm not sure on that. That is, that I think is up to some enterprising designer to take on that task and jump into it. I think the roads are there. The trickiest part is probably getting through. What would it be? Kirith, Gorgor, or getting through the Morgul Vale, particularly from Ithilien into the Morgul Vale, because I know there is a smite wall somewhere in there. So those would be the big challenges for chickens, anyways. Not taking into consideration the fact that everything is so immensely higher level than the players would be. One of the things I remember while playing through this area, and I hadn't caught up, so I had restarted playing, so this was being built when I started working back at SSG, I restarted. Like, I didn't play any of my old characters because I was like, the game has changed enough since I last worked on it that I don't really want to try to relearn my old characters. I want to start something new to play through this. And while working and reviewing this region, because one of the components of building a region is I always go through and I do just a landscape review of, you know, what are the quests that I'm being given? Do we have enough creature spawns on the landscape to meet the quest needs, to meet the deed needs? Do we need to build more little like POIs here and there so that we have static sources for everything that the quest content is calling for? And so as I was doing my playtest through, I hadn't gotten to Mordor yet on my new playing characters, and this area reintroduces Urodani. I believe it reintroduces Urodani, and that was just like a really like interesting looking character to me that I had never seen us do really anything like that before. We had the Regmill and the other nameless creatures and whatnot, which like looked demonic, but we didn't really have anything that I would say looked elemental. And Urodani was the first thing that I looked at and saw. I was like, wow, we have like these cool elementals in the game now, and I'm actually really like intrigued to learn more about how this character was introduced originally, because I had seen the model before and I had known that it existed, but I didn't know where from. And I think it was Made of Lions had told me to just like hurry up and play through Mordor, and some of my questions would be answered. All right. Let's see if there are any other questions here. Mostly comments talking about the cool outfits that the cultists are wearing, with the great big red eyes on the front of it. One of the things I was looking to do with the stream, if I had a little bit more time, was I was thinking about replacing some element on here with the Eye of Sauron, but I never got around to it. So, like I was saying before, we if you're familiar with Dora Marth and going through here, like there would be pitfalls of lava all over the place that I know I have fallen into many times when I actually got to Mordor and started playing through things, because I'm just prone to walking off cliffs and thinking I will survive. But so it was like, I know the designer that was working on this, one of the things he had to do was basically go in and fill in all of those holes, all of those cracks in the ground. And then we were kind of left with the question. I was like, okay, we filled this in. Now what? Now what do we do? Where do we do? What kinds of things do we place in these cracks? Was there stuff that was here before? Are we still kind of just treating this as natural landscape? What kind of enemies do we want in here? And then we have in the distance here, you can see Barad-dûr in the far, far distance. That's another thing that was met with some degree of controversy when it first came out, because, I think our representation of it was not quite the iconic pinnacle that players might have expected. Talking about like this big, looming, dark, imposing tower, with the movies also kind of just evoking this sense of what it's supposed to look like. That was a bit of a challenge for us, because again, it was just this like, what is it supposed to look like? What representation do we try to show of the tower? And as we were talking about it more and more, and reading the text more and more, like having it be this just like singular spire that shoots straight up into the sky, which is kind of, I think, what it's expected to be represented like, because of the movies and whatnot. We kind of had this like, yeah, but that's not necessarily what it's supposed to look like, or even what it would, how it would work, like architecturally, right? Like a stiff wind, just a tall, narrow spire, a stiff wind, especially in Mordor, would just like knock it over, right? And so this idea of our Barad-dûr being kind of more of a triangle with a bit more of a spire at the top, so that it would be supported in the landscape that it was placed in. It would make sense from a building perspective, but still try to have an aspect of it where you could see where you could imagine Sauron's eye looking out through. Um, I think that is one of our constant battles. Druid's Fire says, head canon. That is one of the constant battles we have working with Lord of the Rings is the headcanon nature of it. Our players have a notion of what it should look like, whether that notion is based off of the movies, or it's based off of playing video games, or based off of reading the books. They all have this picture of what it should look like, whether it is a picture, an actual picture that they can look at as an example of, oh, it should look like this, or an imagined picture in their brain from what they've heard or read while enjoying the stories. Um, and we are not immune to that ourselves as well. We come to it with our own ideas about how to show the world that we're building. And most times that like headcanon, that preconceived notion of something, isn't really too much of a challenge to surmount. We can get past it. But when it comes to like really super iconic things, such as Barad-dûr, it it can throw people off, and they can find out that um, they can find it challenging. I mean, I think a lot of the stuff that we've done, even over the last few years, couple of years at the very least, when heading to Umbar, has been about trying to find ways to challenge a preconceived notion. These peoples are evil and thus must always be evil. But wait, their boss is dead now. So what does that mean for them? Were they evil because they were evil, or were they evil because they were pressed into service? Those sorts of things. Um, let's see. Kierder says, the ambience is quite depressing. Was it affecting your mood making it? I think that is something that we try to be somewhat aware of whenever we are building a darker region, something that's meant to be more depressing, more dangerous, more um, unsettling, is the effect that it can have on people, whether it's us who are working on it or the players playing it. I think Angmar, Mordor, Northern Mirkwood, even Southern Mirkwood, um, those are Minas Morgul. Those are regions that have an oppression to them, where you can kind of feel weighed down by your experience in the space. And I think with Gundabad, we went into that very intentionally, trying to make sure that we were giving people breaks, because like the Moria experience was just a lot of dark caves. More the original Mordor experience was dark skies with dark rock and dark cliffs and dark everything, and that can certainly make being in a space for an extended period of time difficult and uncomfortable for people. Um, and so, like I said, I think we are aware of that, and we've tried different things over the years to help mitigate some of that. I think with Moria, we were like, oh, well, the player keylight can help with that, where we can change things up a little bit. Um, don't know that was necessarily the thing. Angmar, our original idea for helping to like break up Angmar's darkness was, oh well we want the landscape to be dark, but let's leverage the creatures as the like pops of color and the things that can kind of like brighten up the scene. I think with Mordor, the presence of lava and fire were kind of meant to do that, but I'm not sure that that was entirely successful. Um, and so that kind of culminated us, in us with both Minas Morgul. I think does a better job of balancing the kind of oppressive tone of the region with breaks, so you're not always just being hit with this dark, depressing region. There's the glowing nature of Minas Ithil itself, as well as just breaks in the content that send you to different locations. Send you here, for example, to Mordor Besieged, which is a little bit different. I think going to different places as you are going through a content experience helps a lot. You don't have to be bopping around to those places in rapid succession, but having opportunities to like take a break, and have the content give you the opportunity to take a break too, not just even you deciding like, oh hey, I'm getting a little overwhelmed by this, I need to go to the Shire. No, like having your content experience be like, okay, let's go to the Gladden Fields for an interlude, and then let's bring you back here. Okay, now let's go to Mordor Besieged for your interlude. Like those sorts of things, I think can help mitigate some of that gloom as you're going through. Gundabad was very much a like, okay, you're in the dark caves of Gundabad, but now you're out in. I mean, not even out necessarily leaving Gundabad, but okay, now you're in Cloven Gap, which is very different and brighter feel. So those sorts of things help a lot. Um, Fortunately, we're not in regions right now where dark and depressing is something that we're going to have a challenge with. I think our biggest challenge right now is with what we're working on with Harad regions, is finding ways to still feel like there's life in it. Um, Pops of green, creatures that feel interesting and exciting, like those sorts of things. I think is where our challenge for those regions come in. And I think we're meeting that challenge fairly well, and the direction we're going with the expansion pack regions for later this year are gonna continue that concept. Alrighty, I think the one thing that I realized too. Oh, the Witch King is here. We're just gonna decline his quest. One of the things too, just as a tangent, unrelated to, no, I don't want to fight archers either. Unrelated to Mordor Besieged itself, but I realized that I am rapidly coming up to the end of regions to preview. I think, or to review rather, with you all. I think I have maybe 2 or 3 more left until I am all done with our regions. That doesn't mean I'm going to be done with this series of streams, but I got to start thinking about what's next as far as the themes and whatnot that I'm going to be doing for the stream. So that is both a scary and exciting proposition to think about, because I know I've got Mordor Besieged. I have a great big list. I have a spreadsheet that's like, okay, I've done this stream, I've done that stream, I've done these streams. So just thinking about like what's next for streams, where I can do themes. I know I did like Arnor and whatnot. So what I might do for the first post region stream, at least until I have regions ready for previews, is do a casual stroll through the Anduin River, because we can cover a ton of ground doing the Anduin River. Many regions of that. Oh, the gloom of Nirn. You're so gloomy. So yeah, I think that might be a good like initial post region casual stroll is the Anduin, because that takes us all the way from Gundabad down to Gondor. So that's pretty extensive. Let's see. Little Redhead said, in some of the earlier streams, there were areas you didn't get to fully explore with us, so going back to earlier areas would be fine by me. I think I think I've hit every region, and I'm there are a couple that I think I've done but haven't been uploaded to YouTube, so it makes it a little tricky for me to like track everything down. Um, but I definitely do think finding themes to go with um, is a good direction to go. Um, George Fair says, "I have a spreadsheet," said no gamer ever. I love my spreadsheets. In my job in between Warner Brothers Turbine and SSG, I was working for a university, and they refused to let me spend money. I was working as a project manager. They refused to let me spend money on getting project management software, so I just built it all in Google Sheets. They'd allow me to use Google Sheets, so I just built it all in Google Sheets instead. And then when I left that job to work for SSG, I think I had about a month and a half's worth of like at least twice a day getting emails from former coworkers being like, okay, so how do you do this in this spreadsheet? How do you do that in that spreadsheet? Um, and looking at it, it's like, no, you unlocked pages you're not supposed to unlock. You broke all of my calculations. I'm not fixing this for you. Fix it yourself. um, Little Redhead suggests as a theme, how about every remote crafting hub in the game? I'm not. You mean some stuff like Galtrev and whatnot, going to all the disparate cities in the world that people might like to use as crafting destinations? Perhaps, perhaps. Maybe do a faction design stream. For example, Gondor, Rohan, buildings, costumes, iconography. That's an opportunity too. Mailboxes of Middle Earth. Here we have a stately mailbox of Bree. Over here in Dunland, we have a basket with a bird pooping on it. So yeah, I think there is a lot of opportunity to do more thematic streams in the future. I certainly want to do that. I also like doing the general Q&As. Um, there may be some like, let's just dig through the stuff that has never been released. Old remnants of Mio interiors may be an option as well. Alrighty. Explore dungeons and instances and raids. So dungeons, instances, and raids are actually somewhat tricky to do preview streams of, or to just do streams of in general, um, if I'm just walking around in them. Um, I could certainly spin up the instance and run through the instance, but I would cheat my way through it pretty aggressively, being a solo player. Usually, when I go into a dungeon, an instance space, I prefer to go into I0 where there's no content or anything, so we can just focus purely on what it looks like in the design as opposed to how it plays. I'm not necessarily the person to talk about how an instance space is going to play, because I'm not that kind of designer. I've dabbled in things like game systems and encounter design, but really I am the level design focus and trying to make sure that the spaces that are built, meet the gameplay needs of the designers that are building the instances themselves. Um, I do like the look of this space, the cathedral look. My only thought in looking at this is, this structure backs up against a mountain. And so having these red stained glass, well, like, definitely helps you draw your eye towards the center. Um, probably wouldn't exist if this building was built for real. Um, that is my one comment about this. I do like the the red light shafts that are coming in though. Those look really nice. Alrighty. So we're going through a few more of the interiors. There weren't a ton of interiors associated with Mordor Besieged itself. We'll take a look at the ones in the region, and then we're going to take a look at the Stout Axe starter spaces as well, which themselves are replicas of already existing spaces. I really enjoyed making this dungeon space, though. This was just kind of a super simple, no frills cave tunnel kind of thing, and it had a vibe to it. When I remember playing through it, it had a more old school Lotro vibe to it, where you're just going through the hallways, picking fights with whatever pack of mobs it happens to be up the ramp and whatnot. Nothing. It was low frills, nothing too crazy going on, which I think really does help it when you get through here and into this next section that is the big heavy story beats, right? It's kind of the running up the cave, running up through the caves is the the trailers before going, before a movie, where you're just oh, these are fun. I'm not having to put a lot of work into thinking about this. I can just cruise on through it, have some fun, and then you come into Barad-dûr itself, through the cave system, and that's when the meat and potatoes of the space really hits. I think in the story here, you're kind of confronted by your menagerie of big bads, and it's just kind of a cool, you walk in and you're oh, people are here and they're looking directly at me. That can't be a good thing. And then the story points that happen as you go further up the stairs. I'm doing my best to talk about the space without spoiling too much of what's going on in here. But this was another one of our big didn't quite have the rights to it, so we're finagling things a little bit reveals, which I think turned out really, really well. I think the scene work that was done here, the story and the the encounter between NPCs was really, really strong. This was a fun space to build. It's always I think the toughest thing, and we'll head back down. The toughest thing with building spaces like this is, for me, is always the bridging between one set of assets and another set of assets. And in this case, it's how do I connect a space that is a cave space directly into this kind of citadel? How do I build this hole in the wall, basically? What tricks do I have to do to make this hole in the wall work? Do I need unique assets for it? Can I take existing ones and, rotate them in weird ways in order to do what I want? Sam Burke suggests the milestones of Middle Earth could maybe be interesting. In the early areas, they aren't so exciting, but become pretty elaborate later in the game. I mean, that is one interpretation of milestones. I'm also thinking okay, well, as you're playing your character, where are your big achievements for your character through the story? What are the big story beats? And that might be something worth going through as well. Is here are the big, character defining story beats for you, for the characters that you have along as NPCs and whatnot. Kurders says, did you take company trips to nature for design research and hangouts together? So years and years ago, we used to do research movie afternoons when we were preparing to start working on a region. So things when we were building Forest Shell, for example, National Geographic was a super helpful resource, and they had a documentary on cold regions in the world, the Antarctic and the Arctic regions. And so what we did as a team is we just we commandeered the work like lounge space, and we built a we didn't build, we had a like movie afternoon. We got popcorn, we ordered pizza, and we just hung out in that space for the afternoon and watched the documentary as research to prepare for Forest Shell. We did the same thing leading into Moria. We've had members of our team who are going on family vacations that have made a point to take a lot of photos. Not necessarily take a lot of photos for the purpose of work, but hey, you're there. Why not take a lot of photos? When we were starting to work on Umbar, one of our designers was going to a space that had a lot of Mediterranean and Moorish influences. So he took a ton of pictures there. Currently, we have a team member who is vacationing. I think he went to Egypt. And I'm sure he is just taking tons and tons of photos right now, too. And they may not necessarily specifically be used as reference for things, but it's always helpful to have that kind of library of assets or the library of photos to kind of use for inspiration. LifeDrive974 says, "Hi, I live in Reunion Island. This is just to say thank you for all the work that you do that makes this game so good." Well, you're welcome. We definitely enjoy doing the work. One of the things that I need to work on setting up better is getting a good set of things that we can use to make reflective floors. Because right now we kind of have a couple of reflective floors that we've like used over and over again, but they're a little tricky to use. One of the things that I want to experiment a little bit with is using co-opting a water plane, basically. So with the water plane, we can apply whatever normal maps and materials we want to make the water look the way it looks. But the one of the things that we could do with the water plane is just not give it any sort of texture or detail and just have it be reflective. And so we could get this nice tiling reflective surface. Reflection is always a little tricky to pull off when you're working in our engine anyways, because we only have really one plane of reflection that we can work with, and you can sometimes see when you're running through an area that has like cascading waterfalls, where there are multiple levels of actual water surface, where you will see the reflections kind of like switch back and forth because the engine itself is fighting over what angle to show the reflection. And so, that it's always tricky. Like the reflections always look nice if there's only one plane of reflection happening. Other times you have to like just kind of deal with it not looking the greatest, because it'll look great in screenshots, kind of thing. See the forest for the trees. Davey65 says, "I'm curious as to why there would be reflective floors like the current place you're at. It confuses me how there would be flooded floors that far up in the tower." Don't think of it as flooded floors. Think of it as polished floors. I think a lot of times when we do reflective floor surfaces, it is meant as a representation of a highly polished floor surface. So treat it in that sense when it comes to looking at those things. All right, so this is one of the last sections of the Stout Axe starter experience here. The designer that wanted this just wanted a spiral, a lot of spiral. So much spiral. And we just keep going up and up and up and up. And I think that's the end, maybe? Or that's just assets being funky. This is the end. That's right. The Wraith won't let me go past. Mandalaire says, also even unpolished red brick is actually very reflective of light, not just face surfaces. That's actually, something to bring up a little bit. Oh, don't mind me. I just fell all the way down. There must be impassables that are on an instance layer. So why don't I go ahead and teleport myself out of here? So we've got about 10 minutes left. This is probably a good opportunity just to open up the floors, world design questions, housing questions, anything you all want to talk about. We got a little bit of time to kill. I'm actually, for first, I ran out of region. I ran out of region for you all. I have never so quickly casually strolled through a region where I didn't have extra stuff that I still needed to go through at the end of it. So, but yeah, so going back to Manadalaire's comment about reflective surfaces, specularity, and whatnot, that's actually something that our artists are playing a little bit more with lately. Actually, one of my new favorite terrain textures is something that we let me see if I can remember it off the top of my head. Hey, I remembered it. One of my absolute favorite new terrain textures that was made by our artists is this mud puddle texture right here. And this is done purely with specularity on the texture. So there's no reflections or anything. All it's doing is it has some properties on it that are like, you're supposed to be super shiny. And that is what that texture does. We've played a little bit with specularity on terrain textures in the past, and you can see it. You can see highlights and whatnot. But this is one of the first times where we've really leaned hard into it and just said nope, you're super shiny regardless. And I think it's really successful. It's a really useful texture, and it does a great job of implying a greater complexity in our terrain than we actually have. It makes you feel like, oh yeah, that's a muddy puddle that you're going to walk through. Little Redhead said, thoughts, plans you can share on future housing. Still considering an apartment type place, an instance inside a busy place like Bree. So right now our main focus for housing is on Rivendell housing. That is being worked on currently. Hopefully sometime we'll have it out sometime this year, but it really all depends on the availability of the designer who's working on it and how far along we get with all of that stuff. Oh, that's an island over there. I wonder what's happening over there. There wasn't an island there before. So yeah, the plans for housing is Rivendell housing first and foremost. I'm having some conversations with Orion about a certain place that might be useful for us to prototype some things in the future. And we do have our kind of laundry list of places that we would like to build neighborhoods in. I think for me, when I build my next one, unless there is a strong reason to do something else, I would like to do a couple of Umbar related neighborhoods. Umbar apartments and a more Umbar City-ish kind of thing. Not in the city itself, but something like that. And then I've seen a few suggestions of people wanting something up by Winterhome. So a neighborhood, a wintry neighborhood up by Winterhome might be a lot of fun too. So those are things that I'm thinking about in my head. We also have some tasks and requests in for the housing system that I'm hoping to get over the course of the year that should help reduce some pain points here and there, help make housing a little bit more appealing and usable from a functionality standpoint. So we've got a lot of stuff that we want to do with housing. Orion and I have this like long game plan of where we want to eventually take the system. And it's just a matter of like building the little pieces here and there until we actually get to where we need to go. So we have Jason B says, please pass to the team a heartfelt thank you, especially with the 64-bit tasks. Cord may deserve a day off. We have a bunch of very busy people preparing for those new servers and all of the transfers associated with it. And I know they are working very, very hard on it. And we appreciate their work as well. And we really want you guys to you all to get on those new servers. So, what's your favorite type of location region to build? I am always partial to kind of mountain forests. It's the kind of territory I grew up in, alpine and deciduous forests on the side of a mountain. It's home to me. So whenever I get an opportunity to do that, I'm excited about it. I do get to do forest work as part of the expansion pack this year. So I'm excited to build a forest region. I haven't had a chance to do that in a while. So, Mr. Alex13 says, Mordor Besieged doesn't feel that besieged compared to Elder Slate at War. And yeah, that's kind of what I was saying before. It felt more like standing armies, not that there were like clashes happening. And I think if we had given ourselves a little bit more time to build it, I think we would have applied more of that at-war atmosphere to it, having conflicts happening on landscape, NPCs that are creatures that would be able to run up to each other and fight each other, like that sort of thing. Maybe even, we didn't have missions then, but I could certainly see missions being leveraged very heavily to kind of impart that war feel where missions are acting as little sorties on the battlefield. Davey says, how come nights and evenings and all the other times of day look slightly better back when the game was first released? I agree to disagree. I think there's certainly some aspects of it where you know how if you go to play a Nintendo game on a 30-year-old TV, that Nintendo game looks pretty good, right? Like you're like, oh, look at this. This is exactly how I remember the Nintendo game looking. The pixel characters all look right. Then you go to play that same game on a modern HD television, and it feels a little off because those games were designed with the hardware that you were first using it on in mind. And Lotro can very much have aspects of that as well, where it was very much designed with hardware and computer platforms from 20 years ago, as opposed to modern. So when you're looking at things from that perspective, kind of think of it as like, oh, well, this night sky was something that was made 20 years ago, and the resolutions that we're looking at things, the resolutions of the monitors, like HD wasn't a thing when Lotro first came out. And so there's certainly going to be aspects of the game where you kind of look at it and you go, okay, well, that looks a little fuzzier than I remember it. And you have to stop and think like, oh, that's probably because when I was first playing this years and years ago, my screen wasn't as good. I wasn't expecting a level of sharpness and crispness then that I'm expecting now based off of the hardware and monitors that I have. If there are assets that you're seeing that look like particularly egregious because of that, by all means, please file a bug on them so that our art team can look at them. Arabani says, speaking of houses, I have abandoned my kin house, but I do not see many decorations in escrow. Will I have them somewhere after I buy a new house, like in the kin chest? Um, if you own other houses, I would say check your storage in those other houses. Um, I'm not super familiar with the hierarchy of where stuff goes, but I do know that if you abandon a house and you have another house that you own, the items that belong to you will go into the storage of that house instead of going into escrow. Escrow is usually a space for if you have no houses. Um, uh, Kirdez Durs says, I apologize for butchering names. Do you go back and add and expand the seasonal festivals, new quests, locations? We all adore them and always want more. That's actually something that I think is something we as a team want to pay attention to going forward. We generally try to introduce new rewards, but rewards are generally less expensive to produce than content to deliver those rewards. The quests associated with them and whatnot. Um, so we do recognize that there is a desire and a want for fresh festival content in the festivals that you all know and love. And there may be stuff in the works to kind of help meet that need. I don't have anything specific to talk about, and it's not really my space to talk about it. That's more of the content designer who's working on it. It's their space to talk about. So yeah. Anyways, we are just over 3 o'clock now, so I think I will wrap up. Thank you, everyone, for coming and hanging out with this stream. Like I said, I think we are just a couple more regions away before I have to switch to figuring out new themes to do for these streams, as opposed to just hanging my hat on regions. So that'll be fun and exciting for us all. Next week, we have Orion and I have We Have a Cave Troll stream. So we should probably be putting a post up about that and talking about the themes for that stream soon too. Fridays, as always, is Cordovan's stream at noon. And yeah, we're just working towards update 44, update 45, update 46, and all the other fun stuff that we're working on this year. And yeah, so thank you, everyone. I hope you have a great afternoon, and I'll see you all next week.